Good evening, everybody. I'm going to call to order the March 3rd, 2021 meeting of the Carroll County Planning and Zoning Commission. Can we establish a quorum, please?
Hi. Ms. Cheatwood?
Here.
Mr. Hoff?
Here.
Mr. Canali?
Here.
Mr. Wathers?
Here.
Ms. Kirkner? Mr. Lester?
Here.
Mr. Gosnell?
Here.
Commissioner Wamp? Secretary Eisenberg?
Here, and I just spoke to Commissioner Wans. He will be arriving late as well.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Chair, please let the record reflect that 6 members are present and we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Any changes to the agenda?
No, there are no changes to the agenda this evening. It's as posted.
I'll make a motion for approval. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we'll move on to item number 5, the administrative report. Secretary Eisenberg.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight. So just a couple things to make you all aware of. That March is a 5-Wednesday month, meaning that we typically would have a Wednesday evening work session on the 5th Wednesday of the month, which would be March 31st. I would like to have that meeting if possible. We do have several agenda items for that evening. However, I would recommend not having the April 7th meeting. That's Easter week, and we don't open up for both meetings back to back, but I would like to have one of the meetings. So if that's okay with you all, we would like to have a March 31st, and unless you feel strongly, maybe not have the April 7th meeting.
I'm fine.
You're fine with that? How about everyone else? Again, it's spring break. I know people aren't doing traditional spring breaks, but it's Easter week and things like that. Okay, awesome. So we will do that. We will have the March 31st then evening meeting. We do have several items for the agenda, and we will not have an April 7th meeting. So then in that vein, one of the items we're trying to do for that evening, and it's an email that I sent out, is to give you all a briefing on the Piney Run Reservoir Dam replacement. They gave a presentation to the Board of County Commissioners. They are doing some public outreach meetings, and as part of their continued public outreach effort, we thought it would be good to invite them, and they liked that idea as an opportunity to, again, get out into the public and have a discussion and let you all know what they are doing in terms of Piney Run Reservoir. So we saw it would be very similar to what the commissioners have presented to them last week. It was really informative. And so I had asked if they would like to, they did. So if you are in agreement, I would like to bring them to the March 31st meeting as well. So we're going to reach out and try to coordinate with them. Okay. And that is all I have for you for my administrative report for this evening. Are any questions? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 6, the industrial light text amendment. I1, the introduction of changes.
Yes, so on tonight's agenda, we're going to be talking about one of 2 text amendments that are coming forward for the I1 zone. I did send you the information, the request from Schaefer and Schaefer with regard to a specific property that they were interested in having this text amendment, and then a staff recommendation of how we feel could be a way to apply this text amendment. And obviously we'll go through the steps with Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners. But the idea behind this text amendment is to allow for self-storage facilities within the I1 zone. And the thought was to limit it to the sustainable community boundaries. So if I can share my screen control room, I'll just go through a quick presentation, kind of hitting the highlights. But you do have in your packet the letter from Schaefer and Schaefer. as well as some staff research and a proposal for the amendment itself. So, thank you. Okay, so this is just an introduction for this evening. We'll be coming back before you to have continued discussion on this. That way you have a recommendation you'd like to forward to the Board of County Commissioners. So just a little bit of background information that back in December of 2020, a representative for the owner of the Finksburg Tennis Bar off of Dee Road requested that a text amendment be allowed for the allowance of self-storage within the I-1 zone. So when we went through the use tables and created the tables for the comprehensive text rezoning effort that we did as part of the implementation of the 2018 Freedom Plan and the 2014 Carroll County Master Plan, this use was eliminated from the I-1 zone. So staff discussed this letter that came in with the Board of County Commissioners on January 21st of this year, and they recommended that this text amendment proposal be forwarded to the Planning Commission to see what your thoughts are and to make a recommendation for the board to hear at some future point in time. And again, this is our typical process. I can't remember the last time we've seen a text amendment from Planning Commission that hasn't been part of the comprehensive effort, but the process is the Board of County Commissioners per county code must send it to Planning Commission for their recommendation. You will then forward a recommendation of what your thoughts are is in terms of the code amendment to the text. And then the Board of County Commissioners will host a public hearing and adopt any changes they feel are necessary to implement the necessary changes to the code. So again, as I said, this text amendment is for the allowance of self-service storage facilities within the I-1 zone. Now, we spent a lot of time, effort, and energy developing our latest comprehensive rezoning effort and text amendments. We spent a lot of time with the Planning Commission as well as the Board of County Commissioners. But as you know, plans, organic documents, as well as code. And this is an area of the code that, you know, this particular property owner thought would be helpful to have a change. And as planning staff, one of the things that we are looking at is to where this property is located. And again, this is not for the specific property. This just brought it to our attention, is to look at our sustainable community boundary. So the general Finksburg growth area is 640 acres. So the sustainable community boundary is a much smaller boundary. It's about 2/3 of that size, probably 400 acres or less, nested within that designated growth area. This boundary was determined by working with the Finksburg Planning Advisory Council organization to help them have redevelopment opportunities within the Finksburg area. This was a several year effort working with the ThinkPAC board as well as staff and economic development to put in an application for the Sustainable Communities Program, which is a state-run program that gives tools in the toolbox for economic development and redevelopment opportunities. So I just wanted to kind of show you the boundary here, and that really it is from the reservoir area in the commercial district of Maryland 140 in Finksburg to just a little bit past 91 to the north side. And then to the south side, it only encompasses the Route 91 shopping plaza and then the commercial and residential along the south side of Old Westminster Pike.
Linda, is the Finksburg area the only area in the county that has that designation, the sustainable community designation?
No, so many of our municipalities, I think every municipality has a sustainable community designation within the municipality. I will say this is the only county area that's non-municipal that has a sustainable community designation.
So this is the only one under Carroll County, our control from a planning and zoning standpoint. All the other ones are within the municipalities. Okay,
Correct.
that's what I want.
And the idea behind sustainable communities, again, is to put tools in the toolbox to help with economic development and redevelopment opportunities. So they really are for communities that are kind of struggling in that way. And that's one of the reasons we identified and wanted to work with the Finksburg community, is to give them some opportunities to have some redevelopment potential. Some of the programs, not to get into all of sustainable community, are facade improvements, demolition, reparcelization, things to help improve the look of the community. And we're working with them on various different things to try to get the ball rolling. And the reason, again, we wanted to keep it limited for this case in the sustainable community is one of the big issues in these type of areas are vacancies. And we don't want to see vacancies of properties. When a property becomes vacant, it becomes hard to maintain and keep up. The buildings deteriorate over time. And so what we're proposing here is to look at maybe an adaptive reuse potential. So we have this tennis farm within the I-1 zone in the Finksburg area. It may not always continue to act as a tennis farm, which is allowed, and it's a non-conforming use in this area, pre-existing non-conforming use. So how can we adaptively reuse it? So not changing the look of how the building is on the outside, its parking or its structure on the outside, but interior, allow a new use. That way we don't have a vacancy in an area that's already struggling with business retention in the area. So I wanted to show you this map so you could see how many properties this would apply to. So these are all the light purple. So you have the dark purple, the red, and then the lighter purple. Those are the zone I-1 properties within the Finksburg sustainable area. So it would not just be affecting one property, it would give multiple properties this zoning text change. So the draft proposal for this would be to allow the uses of self-storage facility in a sustainable community. Self-storage facilities are only permitted in the C2 and C3. Again, just this is the staff proposal. There's still a lot of discussion to be had, making this a conditional use so that way we could verify the sustainable community designation and make sure it meets the adaptive reuse criteria. So this would be the change to 158. And then looking at also accessory uses in the industrial district to also allow outdoor storage of vehicles when accessory to a self-storage facility. Again, this is just an initial proposal. And then specific uses is a self-service storage facility may be permitted in the C2, C3, and in the I-1 district if located within a sustainable community. And then the following conditions still remain in place. So again, just changing those two parts of the text. So again, today was just an introduction. We'll come before you again on March 16th to review this proposal in depth and have a discussion. Again, you have the initial staff recommendation in front of you. And then hopefully on March 31st, when we do have that meeting, we can return to this topic and look at a possible recommendation to the board. And then again, follow that process of you all recommending any changes, if you like it as is, if you want to make a change moving forward. If you don't want to make this change at all, you don't feel it's necessary or needed, and then we'll work with the board to review and have a public hearing on this. Are there any questions?
Linda, I'm assuming the reason why it was not an allowable use in the I district is because we felt like we wanted to save the industrial land for more intensive kind of uses as opposed to storage. Which to me makes sense, but I totally get the adaptive reuse here. And, you know, I like, while we can't specify to a specific property, we are limiting the ability for these adaptive reuses for existing existing building, which I think, you know, makes sense. And I like the idea that if we're going to do it, it would be a conditional use. So those are just some of my initial thoughts on that. I don't know if anyone else, I'd be curious what some of the other members think initially off of this. I mean, obviously we'll have time to think about it.
I'm curious, has the community chimed in as to how they view this change?
Yeah, actually they have. So we work very closely with the Finksburg group and we attend all of their meetings. So we did reach out to them. And again, they have that same sense as they'd rather see something filled than vacant. They do understand they're struggling with vacancies. So we've heard nothing but positive so far from them in our initial discussions with them. So, you know, they haven't submitted a formal comment. Maybe we'll get that from them, but we have not heard any negative. And again, you know, that area, I'm sure you're familiar with it. It is kind of struggling. We're trying to work with them to find ways to redevelop. And again, the reason we didn't want to open this up, I think, Dan, to your point is we don't want to erode then all of that work we did in the I-1 zone to try to make it more industrial and not allow these uses. But and maybe we'll broaden that as time goes on. Who knows? Maybe we'll make it an adaptive reuse for all I-1. I think there's a lot to be discussed, but this way it's a good trial too to see how well it does work, how well adaptive reuse does work, and in a controlled setting. And if we find that this is a great way to move forward and we have other cases of vacancies and things like that, we can look to some other type of proposal like this brought in maybe in this district or in other districts for filling these voids within the community.
I think it's a reasonable first step, Linda, definitely. And
Okay.
I mean, it's a good idea to take one step at a time, and then we can always revisit it.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we will be back before you then next week, or I'm sorry, our next meeting to have some more further in-depth discussion.
Linda, I have one quick question. This is Jeff. We seem to be focused on self-storage because that's what this building could be used for, or it could probably be used for other things as well, I assume. But self-storage typically doesn't generate many jobs. There are other uses for facilities that might generate more jobs in the community. Is that something that, look, I'm not opposed to this, but is that something that's gone into the mix? Because here, this might employ 2 people. If it were used for something else, it might employ many times that.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely a discussion that we should have in Planning Commission to talk about. Should this be broadened or not? Again, the initial request was for self-storage. I think I can make an argument that this is a good starting place because it takes very little infrastructure for self-storage. You probably don't need to do a lot of external at all changes, parking requirements. You don't need to worry about that because you really don't have the employees or staff. It's people coming in and out at their leisure. So I think, yeah, I think it could be broadened, or I could also make the argument for right now, this maybe is a good limited use because eventually at some point in time, you'd like to see it revert back to a true industrial type of use. That's a business generator when the economy is right, when the time is right. So yeah, I think those are the discussions for sure to have.
Since this is an adaptive reuse of existing buildings, what was the thinking behind the height limitation?
There wasn't yet. Okay. You know, we're keeping what was currently in the code for that section, and we just added that in. So yeah, haven't discussed that in depth yet. So that's a good point.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, we'll obviously be discussing this further. Thank you. Moving along to item number 7, our community solar zoning text amendment with the solar and ag community representatives.
Good evening. I have, as you know, I sent Laura sent on to you the changes that we made to the text since the last meeting in response to a couple of requests that you had for additions to the text. So I'd like to review that with you quickly and then move on to, we have a couple representatives to speak to you tonight from the ag community and the solar industry to share their perspectives with you. But if you don't mind, I want to just quickly go over those changes that we made in response to your requests at the last meeting. So I can share my screen. Sorry, I have 2 monitors and I always have trouble getting the right thing. Here we go. All right. So I think page 6 is where the first change is. Here we go. to the bottom of page 6. So you had requested that language be added that would give the Planning Commission the ability to not approve a plan if it didn't meet the criteria of being able to keep this in an agricultural sort of character and setting. So the language that's in yellow is what was added. And it basically it says, you know, you won't, that you can impose additional conditions on the approval of a site plan to protect the agricultural character of the property and to lessen the impact of the facility on the health, safety, and general welfare of surrounding properties and communities. So that's the language that, and I worked with Jim Allman to add these 2 additional language pieces in here. We did want to point out that there is language in chapter 155 that does give you the ability to do this. And I wanted to ask Laura Matthias if she could just review that with you. You know, we've been going through a lot of changes with the zoning code and really trying to streamline things and remove language where it's kind of redundant or it's already covered elsewhere. So we can include this, but I wanted you to consider what's in chapter 155. And so I wanted to just turn it over to Laura for a few minutes to go over the language that's in there to see if you were comfortable with maybe just using what's already in there. But Laura?
Thanks, Brenda. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah,
Yes.
Laura.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Never quite know. So this is so we come to you all very frequently with site plans to approve, right? But we very rarely do we go back to the actual text in our code, which talks about your approval authority in regards to site plans. So we pull this up just as a reminder that you really do have an overarching, the solar is going to be a site plan, just like you would see any other site plan, even, you know, any other site plan that falls into the agricultural zoning district, right? School, church, whatever it is. And you do have that overarching, you know, if you read B1, approve the location and design of all site improvements. Okay, so that is you. You have that authority. Ensure consistency with the master plan in this chapter, right? So just wanted to bring it to your attention. As Brenda was saying, we're aiming to, you know, reduce redundancies in the code. And yes, the text that's in there that we've added definitely speaks very specifically to solar and the ag character. But this in conjunction with, if you go to E1A, where we talk about the primary use of the property, and that's in the text that Brenda has already shared with you, right? The primary use of the property shall continue to be agricultural in nature. So just wanted to bring it to your attention. It's your choice how you proceed with that, but you have that overarching authority when it comes to the site plan approvals.
Laura, I get, you have a valid point, though I do like emphasizing it as well. But I mean, I think that's something we can kind of, as a commission, all think about when we relook at the language. I mean, I understand what your point is. You're saying that we already have it anyway. Yeah, I get you. It's just a question of whether we as a commission kind of want to particularly emphasize that for a variety of reasons. So I get you.
Understood.
Is there someone where we can just reference the 155 site plan requirement in here, that all of this is still subject to that, and then we don't have to be so redundant?
I would think, I mean, I'm going to let Brenda speak, but I would think when we go to E1E, the very first line is site plan approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission is required. Yeah. Right.
True.
So we can think about this particular point. We don't have to decide.
Yep, just thought it was worth mentioning. Thank you.
Okay, so the other change that we made is on the next page under K for height limits. And for most of the items in here, we had no variance permitted. But for the height, we left that as an option that it could be modified. And so we added the language requested to give the Planning Commission the ability to adjust the height, the maximum height, depending on the purpose and what agricultural use would be with it. So, and one of the examples I think we used last time is if you were going to graze cattle under the solar panels, that may not be very common, but there actually is some place on Maryland 194 that does that. And so then the panels would have to be higher up in order to accommodate cattle. And so the language here was added to give you the ability to adjust it higher if the use was going to require it. And then, so that would mean that they would have to include the proposed use underneath, of course, with the site plan. And then the language here also says that the Planning Commission may impose additional conditions on the use if the maximum height is modified. And the reference on the first sentence there to 158.02 is the definitions for agriculture. Do you have any questions on that one? Okay. The only other thing that we added wasn't actually in response to something that you had suggested, but you can see down there in M under abandonment and decommissioning. There's been a question raised about the disposal of the panels when the decommissioning and removal takes place. So we just added a couple of words there to say in their proper disposal, just to encourage that they might be recycled or done, disposed of in a way that would be appropriate and not just like buried, like landfill kind of thing on site, which probably doesn't happen so much, but just to be sure. So that was the other language that we added, and that's it. I think unless you have any other questions about the text, we could move on to our representatives who are here to share with you tonight and answer questions.
This is Jeff Wuthers. I just have one quick question. Under H, E1H, it deals with property owners shall be responsible for controlling and suppressing all noxious weeds, invasive plants, and talks about grazing, I think, grazing of farm animals and that sort of thing. I'm sure I should know the answer to this question, but how is ongoing compliance monitored and enforced so that it doesn't start out good, but a year from now it looks awful and you've got giant weeds and no animals grazing or the wrong kind?
Right. Well, because this is approved by the site plan, it can be enforced through our zoning office. And so Jay White is on if you want to add anything, Jay, but essentially the zoning office is complaint driven. So if a complaint comes in that it's, not being maintained as it's supposed to be, his office can go investigate and take enforcement action. Jay, did you have anything to add?
Basically, Brenda, you carried everything. Like I say, if it got out of hand and someone complained about it, we would get it to the property owner, tell him he's in violation, give him a chance to correct it. If he didn't correct it, then we could take him to court to force him to correct it.
Well, and also he's jeopardizing his site plan approval, was he not, by not following the terms?
If eventually, yes, if it gets to that point, yes, but that would be one of the very last steps that we would get to, yes.
Gotcha, but we have that ammunition as well.
We have that authority.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. All right, and so we're going to start with the agricultural community. We have Harry Sellers with us tonight, who is the president of the Carroll County Farm Bureau, and he also serves on the Agricultural Commission. I've asked each, Mr. Sellers, as well as a representative from the solar community, to give us about 5 minutes worth of just, their perspective on this, specifically on this amendment, and then, take questions from you for maybe another 10 minutes or so. Just to give like a time frame about what we were shooting for. So we'll start with Mr. Sellers, and I think Bill Rash was intended to be joining us, and he is also on the Farm Bureau. I'm not sure whether he is on or not, but Harry, if you would like to turn your camera on and share some, the perspectives that you have, the agricultural community has, we're ready to hear from you.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes, Harry, we can hear you.
Okay, all right. I'm not as up on all these Zoom meetings as you are, but I'll try my best here. Again, my name's Harry Sellers from the president of the Carroll County Farm Bureau, and we just have had a recent meeting with our members back this fall, and unanimously everybody seems to be opposed to these solar panels on any ag land. I know that that's a broad thing to say, you just can't say no, but I know that puts you in a hard place of how you got to do things. But a couple concerns are, what happens to these solar panels when the project's over, or what if you go from these 2 megawatts, what if they want to go with a bigger 4 megawatt or 6 megawatt, just some concerns like that. The noxious weeds, that could be a problem. They also say that some of these panels can have poisonous or toxic waste leak out of them. I don't, but, and then the other thing is a lot of you're talking about ag remainders, that could be as much as 19,000 acres in the county on ag remainders now that you've opened it up to larger acreages. And the other thing is a lot of our farmers also rely on some of these ag remainders. Not everybody has a 100-acre field. A lot of our operations are made up of many smaller plots, and that would jeopardize different operations. So just wanted to voice our opinion and let you know that we're opposed to any of these community solar projects on ag land. I don't know if we could come up with other idea, maybe some county land or over commercial over parking lots or something. I don't know if there's anybody has any different ideas to come up with. Yes, can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Harry. Did you have anything else to add?
No, I think that kind of covers everything. Just, and also sitting on the Ag Commission board, they were also adamantly opposed to using ag land for community solar. I know
Harry, you're breaking up a little bit. What were you saying?
the government's kicked it down to the states to the counties. I know that puts you all in a position where a few alternatives anyhow.
Well,
That's all I got for this evening. I
go on.
Take any questions. If you all have any questions back for me then.
Well, I have a couple questions that I'll just kind of jump into. A couple of the concerns you mentioned, what happens when the solar panels are no longer in use. Of course, the text amendment we're looking at is providing for the bonding of their removal. And of course, this proposal is only limited to 2 watts, and 4 or 6 watts is not allowable. And of course, we just talked about the provisions regarding the noise and the weeds and the noxious weeds. I haven't heard the hazardous waste thing. That's an interesting thing I'd like to know more about. Was one of the concerns regarding some of the farmers losing land that they're renting to solar panels? I would assume that's one of the concerns that you're kind of implying. Is that one of the concerns? Harry, you there?
Could you repeat that question again? I didn't catch all of it.
Was one of the concerns
Yes, I'm here.
of the membership regarding losing land or prices going up on what you guys pay for your, for renting ag land? Brenda, I don't know whether we maybe lost him.
Hard to say, his mic is still on, but yes, that is one of the things that he raised as a concern.
Okay.
Harry, you still there? Maybe not. I can't even ask him if he had anybody else with him tonight. Would you like to move on to our solar representative, and then we can come back to Harry later to see if he's back on?
I would just like to say, before we move on to the industry, I understand their concerns as fully as we can. And since we're having some technical difficulties, if they would like to submit something in writing, I would love to read it. Because again, I just want to make sure we are making decisions with as much information as we can. And that was the whole purpose of this. So if there's something that he was trying to communicate that we did not hear, and I think there may have been, I'm happy to read something if he wants to send us. Pardon me, if he wants to send us something. Excuse me.
Good point.
And I will suggest that to them, that they do provide something in writing as well. Okay, so I guess we could move on then. The other person I've invited is Leslie Elder. She represents the Coalition for Community Solar Access, which is more of an advocacy group as opposed to like a private solar developer. And I've asked the same, take a few minutes just to share the industry perspective on the zoning text amendment and then take some questions. Leslie, are you there? I see she's on.
Can you hear me okay? All right, great. I share your perspective. I would have loved to hear more from Harry and his concerns particularly, but I thank you for the opportunity to address this forum today. I'm Leslie Elder. I'm the Mid-Atlantic Director for the Coalition for Community Solar Access. I'm charged with opening and maintaining markets, community solar markets in Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. I'm also a member of the Farm Bureau and a member of the American Solar Grazing Association, as well as a commodities crop farm owner in Kansas. So just as a reminder, CCSA is a national trade association representing innovative businesses and nonprofits working to expand customer choice through community solar. We have 35 members in Maryland, and we really work with our members to implement best practices from the start to finish. So CCSA appreciates the Planning and Zoning Commission's thoughtful approach to community solar siting. We recognize that this process is a critical aspect of preserving valuable natural resources for residents and for future generations. In our experience in other counties in Maryland and neighboring states, community solar offers a unique opportunity to preserve land, provide agricultural benefits, bring economic benefits to the community and landowners, and then provide access to clean energy with consumer savings to those who can't currently access it. So currently there are 75% of American households and businesses who cannot access solar benefits because of financial and physical barriers to entry. So community solar allows anyone who pays an electric bill to gain access to the clean energy economy by subscribing to a solar facility for their portion of the energy they consume. Through a subscription, community solar and a community solar provider, the customer will receive a credit on their bill for the savings generated from that solar. Additionally, community solar could bring about 1.5 million to 3.2 million in economic benefits to the county in the next 3 years of the community solar pilot program alone, and approximately 400 to 600,000 in consumer savings. These economic benefits include lease payments to landowners and farmers, direct and indirect jobs, increased property taxes for the county, and more money in consumers' pockets. Lastly, community solar can help farmers and landowners and the county resist permanent development pressure to keep farms working for future generations. This really can be a win-win-win. Community solar is developed to be a low-impact, locally sited energy where companies intentionally work with the county and community members to suit the individual needs. No two community solar sites are the same, and they must be carefully designed to meet multiple layers of federal, state, and local regulatory requirements. This includes decommissioning and state bonding requirements. Furthermore, the land that hosts the facility is leased from the landowner, and therefore the community solar organization must meet the needs of the community. We feel strongly that community solar, when it's done right, works hand in hand with preservation. And as this ZTA has already identified, there are many ways that solar and agricultural production work in combination together through pollinator habitats, grazing, and other means. Again, we really thank you for consideration of the ZTA, and we seek clarity on just a couple of things in the current version, including being limited to the remainder parcels and the undefined requirements for the permanent conservation easements. First, by limiting solar siting to the remainder parcels, community solar developers will be limited in their ability to identify the best sites that are best suited for solar and where landowners are willing to host an array. We strive to build projects that use industry best practices for environmental protection, land preservation, grid interconnection, and cost-effective energy distribution to best serve customers. Restricting site eligibility to only remainder parcels prevents optimal siting and predetermines which landowners can host a community solar facility. While it's reasonable for the county to move deliberately when allowing for community solar in the agricultural zoning district, a reasonable approach would be to put a limit on the total number of impacted acres that would be allowed, rather than try to identify eligible sites via the zoning code. This limit should be significantly below the 3,500 acres that is already suggested in the current ZTA. In addition, we have two key concerns around the requirements of the conservation easements, which have not been defined under the ZTA. The first is related to the payments, and the second is under the regard for the duration. Regarding payments, our understanding is that the county easement program typically works by providing compensation to landowners in exchange for establishing easements. In the case of this ZTA, if the solar developer is expected to lease the project, it is expected to compensate the landowners for these easements, in addition to the normal payments under the solar lease. The project will quickly become uneconomical to build. Regarding duration, conservation easements typically run in perpetuity, and it is our experience in other counties in Maryland, as well as other markets, landowners tend to be skeptical about these easement requirements, resulting in a decreased interest and participation in the program. Without such a requirement, only 1 in 20 of the suitable solar sites typically have a landowner interested in participation. This easement provision may decrease the interest even further. So in summary, CCSA recommends two key adjustments to the proposed language. Rather than restricting community solar to remainder parcels, we recommend placing a limit on the number of acres that would be impacted, which leads to optimal siting and landowner participation. In addition, CCSA respectfully requests that the county remove the requirement of conservation easements as a condition of the ZTA, which will allow projects to remain economically viable and will remove the potential barrier for interested landowners to pursue community solar. Overall, we are incredibly supportive of the county's intentionality surrounding the solar siting, and we'd be glad to collaborate with you and the agricultural community on a workable solution. Thank you.
Leslie, I have a question or two. We
Yeah.
received some feedback regarding that right now, the way it's written, that it would only be able to be used by residential customers. And the idea was brought up that it should be broadened to include the ag industry, nonprofit, and governments by changing the term. Is that something that your industry group is supportive of as well?
So yes, we would be supportive of that, although I will say that that is not something that I am an expert on. But it is those projects are still regulated to be under 2 megawatts. And I think that they provide a lot of benefits for the agricultural community, government facilities, and nonprofits.
Okay. Then the other question is sort of a technical question. When you build a solar array, I'm assuming that could impact what your property taxes are because your assessment goes up. So how does the lease with the landowner typically provide for who pays for that additional property tax is going to be charged because of the assessment going up for those improvements? How does that work generally?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So all of the property tax increases, as well as any of the real tax increases, are the cost of the developer themselves and not the cost of the landowner. So really what the landowner does is that they lease a small portion of their land and then they're able to cash a check. This can also answer some of the other questions that you guys were referring to earlier, which is maintenance of the facility. So if there's obnoxious weeds or a solar developer is not doing what they want, the landowner actually has the ability to hold the solar developer accountable because they are responsible for everything within that fence line, including all of the taxes and fees.
Does the county build you typically in I guess some counties or states could be different, but they don't bill you separately for the improvements on that land, do they? Or does that come through the property owner's taxes?
I don't actually know the answer to that, but I can get back to you with the answer to that.
I'm kind of
Probably
curious.
quickly. Yeah, I think that's a great
That's
question.
something you could follow up on just in writing. I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I may be able to get that to you before the end of this meeting.
Leslie, earlier we had a question raised, and I had never heard it before, that there's some toxicity issues that could be associated with solar panels. I mean, are you aware of anything like this? Does it leach into the soil? Does it impact future use? What concerns should we be aware of regarding that?
Yeah, I'm aware of these concerns. There's been a lot of scientific studies that have actually debunked this theory, which I'm happy to share with you. I do understand the absolute concern of farmers in particular of wanting to take care of their land. Happy to share those studies over with you, but from all of our experience and the studies that have shown that that's just simply not true.
If you could share that information, if you have, I mean,
absolutely.
Some of, not, don't send us 100 studies, but some background on that, because that is an interesting point that was brought up that I would definitely know about.
Happy to. I can even provide you a summary with links so you can just get the snapshot. And then if you want to read further, you're welcome to.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
So this is Jeff. I have just a couple questions. One thing I had raised before, maybe I was a little bit unnecessarily harsh when I said that I think these solar panels in agricultural land are ugly, but I do think they are. I think Gene had reined me in a little bit, and he said, "Well, they look a little, I think industrial. I think was a more euphemistic term." I still think that though, when I look at a agricultural vista, and we have some very nice ones here in this county, the idea of looking out and having that basically corrupted by these panels causes me heartburn. I don't like that. So while I hear that we can have I hear the positive attributes, and I'm not diminishing what you've said about that, I still have a hard time getting past the fact that there are many reasons why this county tries to preserve agricultural land, but one of them is that it's part of the character of our county. And part of the character is how it looks. And having this vista interrupted with these things troubles me. So I'd be interested in speaking to how can you make me feel better about that? And sort of related to that is the notion is, are you aware of these community solar projects in places other than agriculturally zoned land, like commercial or industrial zones?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take the first part of your question and then the second, if you're okay with that. So as far as vistas, I appreciate that. Going back to being a farmer, I think that that's an important thing. One of the things that we can do is work very closely with you all on making sure that we can site solar again in places that that both meet environmental standards and then the interconnection standards. Also, we can put trees up. We can do all sorts of things in order to ensure that we're not impeding the visual views based off of the recommendations of the Planning Commission. As far as the other sites that you can do solar, I mean, we believe that it's an all of the above approach. One thing that I do just want to, without going down a massive rabbit hole, one thing that I do want to say about Maryland, I think that there's lots of things that Maryland has done very right, specifically with the community solar program. One thing that was not addressed by the legislature is the incentives in order to be able to make a lot of the community solar facilities incredibly economical on some of the commercial sites. They're just significantly more expensive, which is something we can talk about to weave those needles, but I just want to be very honest about that.
Leslie, one other question I have, and you don't, a range is fine, but I want to get a sense of, at least in the state of Maryland and what your other experience has been. As a landowner, if I'm assuming I'm paid by the acre on an annual basis, is that correct? And
yes.
What is the typical, did you say correct, that is correct, by the acre?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what is the, and it can be pretty broad, but what is the range of what that rent is per acre?
Yeah, I mean, that is a very hard question for me to answer because it depends on a lot of variety of factors. But a good planning tool is around between $400 and $1,000 an acre, depending on a wide variety of things. So without specifically looking at Carroll County, which I'm happy to do, I can't give you an exact number on that, but generally that's where things are.
Well, if you have any more detailed information on that, maybe follow up with that with some of the additional information.
Yep, happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things the Farm Bureau had mentioned is right now it's at 2 megawatts. Do you see that there's a potential that these community solars would move to larger facilities besides beyond? Okay.
Yeah, so at this point in time, we are legally mandated to be 2 megawatts or less. The Community Solar Pilot Program will maintain that there's only 3 years left in the Community Solar Pilot Program. After that, there would be a legislative change in Annapolis that would be required to extend that program out. At that point in time, I think considering all of the concerns that are had with the agricultural community in particular in Maryland, I don't see that we would be moving beyond that. We do have a good relationship with the Farm Bureau at the state level, and we've had lots of conversations with them. And so I think that we would not be pushing for that, at least not at this time.
other questions? Thank you. That was very helpful, Leslie.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I will follow up with all of those questions for you.
Yeah, thank you. Brenda, did you want to do anything else? Or I know we also have time for public comment. I don't know if there's any callers on that also want to express some additional thoughts on this.
Yeah, it appears that Harry is no longer on, so I think that we're done with what we had wanted to cover. And yeah, so you probably should go ahead and move on to taking comments then. I do see one call.
Yeah, if we can unmute the callers that are on the line. If anybody has called in or would like to make a public comment, go ahead at this time.
Hi, yes, this is Jake Springer. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, thanks. This is Jake Springer with the company Nexamp. I spoke in front of the commission previously on the phone, but we're a developer, long-term owner and operator of community solar in Maryland. Once again, pleased to see the commission considering allowing for the development of community solar in Carroll County. And I think I really would echo some of the things that Leslie from CCSA had to say tonight. And then we have some concerns about the current approach, in particular the focus on remainder parcels within the county is the only parcels eligible to host community solar. I really respect and appreciate the work that's gone into this already. And I know the idea here is to start small, start conservatively, but respectfully, I think this isn't the best way to do that. I think given all the factors that go into solar siting, the commission shouldn't try to pick sort of the eligible sites via the zoning code. And essentially, as we see it, this proposal would try to shoehorn solar into specific parcels that the commission has selected via the zoning code. Finding the best sites for solar is what companies like Nexamp, my company, do for a living, and we know how to find sites that work from an environmental perspective, from a electrical grid perspective, and with the community and with willing landowners. So I hope the commission will take a look at maybe a different approach and to use a neutral standard like what I think Leslie was talking about, where you could have a total cap on the acreage, and that might better balance some of these concerns about bringing solar into the agricultural areas of the county and allowing for effective and sort of well-sited community solar development. And I think that approach would require far fewer acres to potentially be impacted than the current proposal. So really appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other? It looks like we do have another caller on the line. If anybody else would like to make a public comment, go ahead at this time.
Hi, this is Amberly Young with Community Power Group. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity to comment tonight, and I appreciate the Planning and Zoning Commission's and also the staff's thoughtfulness in this process. We are a community solar developer. We also develop net metering systems across the United States, and we're also a CCSA member, so I just really want to say I appreciate Leslie's comments tonight and appreciate her representing our industry. I also wanted to comment on Mr. Hoff's question regarding aggregated net metering facilities, and we wanted to reiterate our suggestion that the community solar zoning text amendment is expanded to allow these types of facilities, which specifically benefit the agricultural industry, nonprofits, schools, and governments within Maryland. The way the community solar pilot program is designed in Maryland, no one energy user can subscribe to more than 60% of the system's electricity output, which likely prevents large institutions like schools and agricultural entities from signing up to the output of these systems. So adding meter aggregation under the Code of Maryland 2050-1007 to the zoning amendment under the definition of solar energy generating system would allow specifically these types of institutional users to experience the benefits of the solar under the same type of system size requirements and other restrictions as the facilities under the community solar pilot program. So we feel that it's a simple text change that will widen the potential benefits of the zoning amendment while retaining the same proposed size and design limitations for agricultural parcels. But thanks for the opportunity to comment, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. I don't think we have any other callers on the line. Brenda, the one thing about the remaining portion, I believe that was the directive from the commissioners, correct?
That's right. The commissioners directed us to look specifically at remaining portions, and they also directed us to include the easement as a part of this, as a part of what we build into this.
Is there a strong rationale behind that, or was that just an outlying thought?
Well, one of the things that it would accomplish, and this isn't necessarily what the commissioners said, but one thing that the easement would accomplish is that one of the things the agriculture community was concerned about was the possibility of expansion of these facilities in the future. Now, it is true that right now they are capped at 2 megawatts. And so that they can't expand at this time if they are built to their full capacity. That doesn't mean that state law couldn't change. But so the part of the idea with the easement is it would keep that expansion from happening. You know, if you build to the full 2 megawatts, and then under this amendment, we also capped the area at 20 acres. So this would address the ag community's concern of potential expansion of those facilities in the future, so that we don't have, you know, facilities that continue to expand larger and larger in the future. But I believe that, and Commissioner Wentz or Tom can correct me if I am wrong, but I believe part of the reason the commissioners requested the easement to be included in this is, you know, right now these properties don't have the ability to do solar because it's not allowed in the ag zone, and they've already used their residential development rights. So using, you know, being able to do this would give the county the opportunity to expand the amount of land we have under preservation while giving these property owners the opportunity to do something that they don't have now.
Brenda, as someone who's worked a lot with ag easements, I guess I have a couple thoughts on, you know, the easement idea, and not for us to decide anything tonight, obviously, but you know, the thought has occurred to me, you know, in exchange for putting, you know, these solar panel arrays, in my mind, you know, 50 years from now, I don't think they're going to be there, because I think the technology is going to change in such a way that, you know, I might have one panel on the side of my house that runs my whole house. Technology is changing very quickly. So while I think this is a good step, you know, 30, 40 years down the road, these solar panel arrays with community solar isn't going to be there. But yet, in exchange for the ability to put on these solar panels, we as a county are asking for a permanent easement. And I just want to throw out the idea or the concept that, you know, not all easements, you know, the ag preservation easements have a long history. Some, especially early on, some of the easements had a lifespan. You know, it could be, you know, 50 years. So I understand the desirability for the easement, and of course it helps get us towards our goal. But I also understand the indigestion of that we're, you know, it's a temporary use, but yet we're taking the easement forever. And I understand, quote, it's a remainder, but what, is everybody still there? Yeah. So I understand it's a remainder, but, you know, zoning does change over time, and it could be, you know, 50 years from now, a remainder parcel might have a different ability to have something done to it. So I do have some consternation about the idea of these easements being permanent in exchange for this. And I have some question about really, you know, how many people are going to want to sign up for this if that's going to be one of the conditions.
So Dan, is it your thought that the easement would be would expire or revert, you know, given up, I guess, would go away, expire, whatever you want to say, as soon as the decommissioning of the solar panels or the economic life of the solar array was exhausted and the solar panels were decommissioned, then the easement would go away. Is that what you're thinking?
That's one possibility. Another possibility is that you simply make it for a long enough period of time, like 50 years, and call it a day at a certain number. It's just a thought. Again, it's something I think we should all be thinking about between now and as we continue to look at this proposal. I mean, there's a lot of different things going on here, but I do, this is a temporary use, and I don't think these community solar arrays are going to be around 50 years from now. I might not be here to see it, but I just don't think they will be. So, but yet in exchange, we're taking a permanent easement. I don't know.
In my mind's eye, there are three things, if we decide to approve this, and I'm generally in favor of it. I'll just say it out loud. I think having alternative forms of energy is not a bad idea. But that's my predisposition. But I do think that there are three questions that I really am not sure what I think about on, and I could be swayed. It is the easement, Dan, and I think you're bringing up a great kind of middle ground solution. I actually don't think it has to be 50. I think it ought to be satisfied when it's decommissioned, the easement goes away. I mean, because I see them being connected. So that's one thought, is how do we treat the easement? The second thought is who can benefit from this? Do we allow governments, schools, commercial properties to benefit from it? I think that's the second. And then the third one is are we going to limit it to these remainder ag properties? And again, I need help understanding, the pros and cons of those three things, because I really don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. I do want to understand why we wrote this the way we did, because there's obviously rationale to it. But again, I think those are the three things that in my mind, I really don't understand well enough to say this is how I feel about it.
If I could, if you all are all right with me kind of jumping in here, because I can maybe, this is Tom Delvis again. I could probably can you all hear me first? Can
Yes.
everybody hear me? All right, because I've had problems with my computer lately. So let me address some of the concerns, Mr. Lister, you brought up. First, regarding the length of the easements and all. I mean, our current ag easements are all permanent easements. And I know, Mr. Huff, you're right that some of the early ones were limited in their, but there's a big but to that. In order to get out of one of them early ones, it's almost impossible. It's very hard. You have to go through a very laborious process through the local board, the state board, and then basically what you have to do is pay back the value of the easement as it is now, not as you purchased it. So it's a very difficult process to get out of some of those early easements. Unlike now, again, everything we do now is permanent. There's no time limits on them. So to actually take this purpose of providing a permanent easement, which the board directed us to look at, and turning it into a limited easement doesn't make any sense. Because the direction from the board was that we could provide permanent preservation easements in relation to this solar development. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the 20 acres that they're doing solar on is not going under easement. So when they're done the solar, that will have the ability to do whatever the zoning allows it to do there. All right, and that's a very important thing. So they're not giving up everything on the entire property. And I would say, yeah, if you got 120 acres and you're going 20 acres of solar and 100 acres in preservation, that's something probably somebody's going to think about. If somebody's sitting there with 25 or 30 acres and they're doing 20 acres of solar and 5 or 10 acres of permanent easement, that might be a good trade-off, because they're going to have 20 acres when they come out of the solar to do whatever the zoning allows them to do at that point in time. So I think those are some of the things you have to weigh, and those are some of the things that property owners are going to have to make a choice in. And really, to tell you the truth, whenever we do zoning, we do the same. We do the same for everybody, for everything. You just went through a process of a rezoning process with properties, and you were picking properties and not picking properties to do change zonings on and change values on, and that's what zoning's about. With everything that we basically do. So, take those things into consideration, and the Board of Commissioners, in regards to the remaining portions, the board was very clear and direct to us. They wanted to start small. They wanted to do this as a pilot. They didn't want to get too in over their heads with solar at this point in time. They wanted to make sure that they were looking at it in a limited capacity, seeing how it goes, coming back later and expanding it if they needed to. So that was a very specific direction to us about using the remaining portions. The other fact is that, again, they are developed. They're not, they've taken away the residential development there, and thus they have been developed in some capacity. So putting solar on that was something that I think the commissioners felt was very logical to maybe pursue, because you weren't taking an agricultural piece of property that has not, taken any development on it and basically converting it to the solar. All right. And there was a final point I wanted to make too. Boy, I ran out of juice here. So give me a second and maybe I can come back to that one. But those are some of the pertinent points that we had discussions with the board. And I just want
So Tom, if I can
had a lot of good conversations like you're having and gonna have on this issue. So those were very clear directions they gave us. Oh, I wanted to address the net metering that's been brought up. I think that's something that we as staff.
You're muted.
Want to expand it because again, we talked solely to them and we had discussions solely about community solar, and this is not really labeled community solar. So what I want to make sure is the commissioners fully understand.
You're muted again, Tom. Just really quick about Tom collects his thoughts. I just want to add on to what he was saying that, again, this is a small pilot type of study. As you know, as we move through the commercial industrial employment campus, we're working on residential now. We are still looking at text amendments to the conservation and ag zone. So if this works in a certain way and you want to move forward, maybe expanding it, that could also be the time to talk about yes or no as far as making changes to ag for these types of solar uses in the future. So again, we still have that we're working on. Just wanted to throw that out there.
I see Tom over where Brenda was, so maybe he wants to.
I'm sorry. That's the fourth time in about a week. I'm very frustrated with it. So I'm not sure how much you heard. Oh my gosh. And I don't know if I can repeat it all, but we did have very specific discussions on a lot of these topics with the board. And so we can certainly provide any, follow-up on anything that you might need. The other thing I thought about that I wanted to say, Mr. Huff, in regards to what you brought up about 50 years from now, I would say there's a very much likelihood that that 2 megawatt solar field on that 20 acres may turn into a 100 megawatt solar field on 20 acres, because I suspect those panels are going to get a lot smaller and more efficient. And so instead of growing in size, they're going to be reducing in size and being able to do something a lot greater on that small piece of parcel. So another reason why it might be good to start out small here, maximize these acres that we have with the intent that maybe the panels are going to grow smaller and we may not ever have to expand on greater acres. So that's a scenario you may want to consider or think about too.
Well, Tom, that's a good point. That you're right. It could exist. It just might exist in a very different form, and it might power a lot more. Tom, thank you for kind of filling in some of the perspective. While not to put Commissioner Wance on the spot, but I would, since he's here, like to ask him, because understanding the perspective of what the commissioners were thinking is important. And at the end of the day, we're making a recommendation because they're going to be making the final decision here anyway. Just to clarify that's how a text amendment works. We're just reviewing it, brainstorming it, and making a recommendation. But while I got Commissioner Wance here, did you have anything that you wanted to add, or did Tom pretty much kind of cover everything from a thought process of what you guys were thinking?
No, I think both Tom and Brenda, Dan, first of all, good evening, everybody. Nice to see everybody. Dan, I think both Brenda and Tom covered what I would have said. What I was going to focus on and tell everyone that this is a pilot. This is a pilot program for us, and I don't want that to get lost in the translation here, because as you hear from all of these energy companies that are calling in here, they've got these grandiose ideas of don't tell us where to put it, we'll tell you where to put it. And that's just exactly what I don't want to happen here. That's why I want you guys to engage. And your conversation tonight, Pete, Dan, Jeff, your questions, all of your questions have been great. Jeff, I concur with you on the beauty of these systems. I'm right there with you, my friend, because I've often said that. And the thing to keep in mind here is, at the beginning of this year, and of course, this is in the middle of COVID too, the U.S. Energy Information Administration predicted that solar, along with wind, would represent more than 3/4 of all the new energy added to America's grid network. So this isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And I haven't been able. We've been a little bit busy lately, Dan, as you know, but I haven't had a whole lot of chance to dig into this. But Tom's spot on. I don't think we're ever going to see the panels go away. What I've read is that they're going to get a lot smaller and become more intense as a result of that. And I've been doing a little bit of work on that as well, because as you guys know, with my background in public safety, there's always been this challenge with the rooftop arrays, because they are incredibly dangerous to our firefighting community. We've gone so far in Annapolis and with legislation to make sure that there are walkways on roofs for safety. And to be quite honest, there's a lot of public safety issues with solar. You pull up to an array and it's glowing. Okay, what do? Well, the typical, get off the fire engine and get the fire hose ready doesn't work here. So there's just a lot. There's a lot to these things. But I went a little bit far here, but what I wanted to say is, let's not forget that we really wanted to make this as attractive, as workable in our beautiful county as we can. And that's why we focused on the remainders, because we wanted to try to keep it small scale and do a phased in approach here, if you will. When I'm working with my colleagues from across the state at MACO down in Annapolis, I hear the horror stories of them talking about driving by these huge arrays of solar panels. I don't know how many folks have been up by Mount St. Mary's College in the recent past, but there are huge arrays up there, and that's not what we want to do here. We want to. Can I use the word surgically infuse these things? I think that's where we were trying to get to. So there's my 10 cents on solar energy, Dan. So, and listen, we knew there were going to be challenges as far as, with these remainders. We really did, but we really felt that was the safest and perhaps the less challenging place to start. as we begin our approach with this. So.
You know, Commissioner, yeah, I mean, Carroll County, obviously, we're going to be very different from the way Baltimore County does it, the way Anne Arundel, I mean, okay. Any other?
And Cynthia, that's why the conversation that you guys have had tonight is very valuable, because you guys have brought up some excellent points. And you know, I applaud you. I applaud you guys for thinking about all these things, because that'll help us make the decision here. And you're right. You're spot on. I said this before, Cynthia, when we first brought this up, I don't know, 3 weeks ago or whenever. I do not want to be told by legislators in Annapolis where to put solar arrays in Carroll. I want to be told by the folks that live here in Carroll, and that's you guys. That's what I want to do. So that's another reason why we kind of wanted to get out in front of all this. You know, so no, very valuable point, Cynthia. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think in the same aspect, you know, this is a great thing for Carroll County because it allows people who can't have solar arrays or solar on their roof, or maybe don't want to, then join into the community solar. So, good point. Any other points anybody wants to make? And what's the next step, Brenda?
Before we move on to that, I do see that Harry Sellers is back on. I don't know if you wanted, if Harry can hear me and he is able to get his audio, if you had additional questions for him before we moved on, since he wasn't able to finish.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, we got you, Harry.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I guess I lost connection there somehow.
Does anybody have any questions for Harry Sellers?
Yes, I can take any questions if anybody has any, if you can still hear me.
We can hear you, Harry, but it seems like everybody's had their questions answered.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to voice our opinion then.
Thank you, Harry.
I guess the next step then would be to figure out where you want to go from here. We have the text, and you know, what do you want to do next? You know, I assume you want to have some discussion about what your recommendation to the board will be, and I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, but I assume that you'll have her draft the recommendation to provide to the commissioners. And of course, first you'll need to discuss and decide what your recommendation is going to be. So in terms of what that could be the next step, if you're ready to have that discussion at the next meeting.
Yeah, my thought process is I think we've heard plenty at this point, and some people were going to submit some additional stuff by email. I kind of think that either, you know, at one of our next two meetings, depending on the schedule otherwise, that maybe we could, you know, kind of go back through the text, talk about it again as a group, make whatever additional changes we want to make, and then send it forward up to the commissioners for a decision on their end is my thought. I don't know what everybody else thinks, but that's kind of where my headspace is on this.
You know, one thing so far from the agricultural side, you know, Harry was speaking to us, and I think last time Wayne Barnes also was speaking to us from sort of the agricultural perspective. And so far, at least my perception is that the agricultural voice we're getting is sort of uniformly against this. The Carroll County Farm Bureau and the Ag Commission Board. But of course, there may be other farmers that farm differently or think differently and may not necessarily be reflected in the comments that we're getting. So I guess I would invite, if there are folks that are listening or talking to others that come from the agricultural side that maybe see it differently, those comments could be submitted in writing. I would certainly welcome that perspective as well.
I definitely agree with you, Jeff.
And Brenda, you have been getting comments. I think you did have one from a farmer in that same vein. So I think they've been sent to Planning Commission. We've been forwarding them on to you, but maybe we can gather all the comments for you all to have too for your next discussion.
Yeah, I think we got one recently from a farmer, but other than that, I think the other ones were more negative. I think but the last one we got was the positive one.
Yeah,
I have talked to some individual property owners who have farms who are in favor because they would like to see this on their property. So, I think as a community, it sounds like the ag community organizations are opposed to it, but there are individuals who support it because they would like to pursue it on their property.
Jeff, and I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to make the point that when Harry was talking about several of the concerns that were brought up by the Farm Bureau, 3 of those out of the 5 concerns that I wrote down that I heard were things that were addressed within the text amendment itself. So I think we need, and not to say, with all due respect, everybody has the right to their opinion, but some of the concerns were directly already addressed within the text as well, which I kind of found interesting. So I think there might be a little bit of fear out there that might not be based entirely on what the text actually says. Just a
And some of
thought.
that could be coming from, I mentioned previously that we had spoken to many of the agricultural community groups like the Farm Bureau and the Ag Commission, the Ag Advisory Board back in the fall. And there were some changes that were made as a result of that to our concepts before drafting the text and coming to the Planning Commission. So it could be that they are still thinking of the way the concepts were prior to coming to the Planning Commission with what we have now.
Yeah, and I very much, I understand that, and I appreciate that very much. And I know, for example, one of the comments we got from the agriculture community was talking about how this potentially opens Pandora's box for development and that sort of thing. And I think, Commissioner Wance was really pointing out that isn't necessarily concerned with the way these commissioners are approaching this. So it's a concern, but it's being addressed. And so I get that we have this yin and yang back and forth. I really just want to make sure that we're getting sort of all the perspectives out of the ag community that we can, because it's such an important part of our heritage and our community here in this county. So the more I can be educated, we can all be educated about that. And Linda, you guys have done a great job of sort of batching comments in the past. I know these come in, we've had some come in sort of individually, and just for me, my problem with that is I get a zillion emails and sometimes I skim it and then it gets lost and I read it, but I don't get a chance to go back and find it again. So the way you've done these batchings in the past have been really helpful to me.
I can compile all of the comments that were sent to you because Linda's office did share them with me if they didn't come directly to me or if I wasn't copied on them. So I will compile them all into one document and send them to Laura Bavada to get sent out to you before the next meeting.
Thank you.
Maybe we could organize them too, like ones that are pro and ones that are against, and kind of do like we've done in the past for you.
And I'll try to make sure that I get those fed to you as well, Brenda and Linda, because I've gotten quite a few myself. I've gotten, one dear friend of mine who's a big ag guy here in the county has, a lot to say about it. He, just for example, he said, why not put language in there that says that it'll be on the least productive areas of the remainder. And also have the least impact on the farmability of the resulting land, language like that. So these guys are thinking about this. This is an example that, I don't think they're all against it. I think that they have their reservations about it, but I think they all realize that we've got to do something here because none of us want to see these huge solar arrays So, so a lot of them are really thinking about this. So I've gotten about, I don't know, a half dozen also. That's just an example of some of the language that I've gotten from some folks about things that you could put into the language here to make it suitable. So I'll get those to everybody too. And there's a gentleman I work with by the name of Weaver. You guys probably know him, Dick Weaver. Anyway, he's got a lot to say about this too, and he eats, sleeps, and breathes this ag stuff. So he's got some comments too. So we'll try to get them to you before it gets to us, so that you guys can maybe insert some language that will make it easier for us in the end. So we'll get those to you. I'll be with him tomorrow, and I'll make sure we remind him to do that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, so I think in the next couple meetings, we'll just basically have a final discussion after we get those comments compiled. Then we'll determine which meeting it's more appropriate. Sounds like it might be most appropriate on the 31st.
If we have you scheduled for the next meeting, and we can put you on the agenda on the 31st as well. So there's plenty of room. And we are setting the next agenda for the March 16th meeting and have this as an item after our development review projects. So it'll be a long meeting. Anticipate that. Sorry. When it rains, it pours.
I guess well, that Wednesday is St. Patrick's Day, right? So, okay. Any other comments, questions? So with that, our next meeting is Tuesday, March 16th, our normal 9 a.m. business meeting. It sounds like we're going to be here for a long time. So get ready. And with that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. See you guys in a couple weeks.
Thank you all.